Good morning. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing more pleasing than coming on to the dulcet tones of Freddie Mercury, helping the finished vehicle logistics industry break free, to disrupt itself before it's disrupted any further. My name is Christopher Ludwig. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Chief Content Officer here at Automotive Logistics, and it will be my pleasure to guide you and welcome you across our content and program the next few days here at Finished Vehicle Logistics North America 2024. The title, the theme of our event, Disrupting the Status Quo, Raising Performance Through Innovation, Flexibility and Partnerships. They say you should try to disrupt yourself before you're disrupted. It's too late, I think, for the finished vehicle logistics industry. We've certainly had to adapt to many, many issues over the past couple of years. But I do think the resiliency, the flexibility, the transformation has been pretty profound. And we have an opportunity now to go to a different level. And what we're going to do over the next couple of days, and today you see the agenda laid out for you, is really go into detail on some of the ways that OEMs, logistics providers, are disrupting the status quo of this industry. Because there are points, and if those of you joined us at the event last year, where you could say the status quo just wasn't working anymore. The way things were done in this industry for decades just weren't satisfactory, whether it was the performance, on-time delivery, capacity issues, cost, quality. Something had to change, and I think a lot has changed. You'll hear over the course of the next 2 days many, many examples, whether that's increasing flexibility, re-engineering the network, extending dealer opening hours, looking to alternative transport means, whether that's a cars and container, whether that's dealer drive-away and pickup, many, many things, many reactions out of Mexico, ways to add capacity, short sea, many, many changes. But still, the market continues to adapt very dynamically. The solutions we come up to solve yesterday's problems won't always hold for tomorrow. And we know that there's a tremendous amount of technology coming into the industry, a tremendous amount of opportunity. And that's what we're really here to share, to exchange ideas on, and hopefully to help you further disrupt the status quo and move us to the next level here, not only for improving your bottom line and your cost base, but ultimately to the benefit of your customers and the wider industry. I won't go through it line by line, but we're going to start with some Q&A shortly with some major OEMs, including Ford and Subaru. We'll be hearing from Volkswagen Group of America an example of exactly some of the key changes the group has made at a North America level to deal with some of those many issues that you all recognize and face. We're going to be deep diving into Mexico together with Nissan and BMW. And we're going to have a series of workshops and ideas lab this afternoon. I'm particularly excited about these. We're going to break you up into different groups. You're going to have an opportunity to work in smaller groups with some leaders on topics like visibility and telematics, on carrier quality, on preparing for EV infrastructure at ports and otherwise, and a little bit of fun as well with a game of Jeopardy hosted by our friends at Accelerated. And a lot more to come this afternoon and tomorrow as well. A quick word of thanks and acknowledgement to our sponsors for Finished Vehicle Logistics North America. They are the partners, certainly, that helped to make this event possible. They're also the partners that helped to move this industry forward as well. So I hope you'll spend some time networking, visiting booths, exchanging and speaking with them, including, for example, our knowledge partner, DP World, our global partner, because they're a partner at many of our events across North America and Europe, Freight Verify, our gold sponsors, including Assertis, Accelerated, Automobile, Autos in Motion, Blue Yonder, Cognosis, CRC Transport, DRS, First Impression Transport, Glovis, High Tech SAS, Herg Autoliners, Inform, Jack Cooper, KHS, Masni, Nationwide, Port Freeport, Proficient Auto Logistics, RPM, and SDM Transport, our silver partners, CSS, Liz Trucking Auto Transport, ProAct, our bronze partners, MSC, Port of Wainimi, and Prism, Our startup sponsor, a new initiative, AutoSled, and a partridge in a pear tree. So again, many, many thanks to all of them. Really important, you would have received an email already as a registered attendee of the event. You have access to our conference app, and there not only can you see the agenda and everything that's happening, see more about our partners, but you'll see all the attendees listed. You have an opportunity to request a connection, request a meeting, for example. At the end of each day, we will upload videos that are only available to those who register at the event. They're not available to the wider public, but there will be videos from each session that you can watch on demand. So all of today's sessions will be available from tomorrow, for example. So you can download that here if you didn't already. Again, there's an email that will take you there as well. And if you want to connect to the Wi-Fi, here is the network and code FVLNA 24 to stay online. Okay, excellent. Before we get into our first session, and I bring on some of our expert guests to join me in some Q&A and take some of your questions, I'd like to invite you all to give some of your responses and just start with a little bit of an audience poll. So it's a very simple process. You just have to take your smartphone, scan that QR code. If you're in the back, you should just be able to zoom in and you'll pick it up, or you can go to the website itself and enter that code. But if you just take a moment now and scan this, it's completely anonymous. We won't have any. We won't be able to see who's voting or who said what. So if you can connect on, I can see through this lovely little bubble there that some of you are doing that. The code will stay up in the next couple of minutes as we go through this, so it's not too late. But great, so I see a number of you are doing that. So the code's going to stay up. Continue to do that, and why don't we jump into our first question. So that, I have the control of that, great. Okay, so the question is, what is most hindering stable, efficient vehicle logistics operation in North America in 2024? Is it port and shipping capacity? Is it quality and software holds? Is it rail service and capacity? Or is it road transport? You can see the options there. Or is it uncertain forecasts in the industry? So I can see you all voting now. If I can just remind my team to switch that to the percentage, please, so we can see the percentage winners on this answer. And nearly 100 of you have already voted. I'll just give that another moment. And we deliberately did not have all of the above answer here. And it's going to be a tight race, a really tight race, I think. But coming out ever so slightly ahead, just by a margin, seems to be uncertain forecast, followed shortly by rail service and capacity. And not an insignificant 20%, not an insignificant amount, also pointing to quality and software holds. So at this event last year, I think you probably would have seen the rail service capacity sort of at the overwhelming response level there. But here we can see it's a little bit more mixed. We know that there are lots of launches happening out there, lots of quality holds, some manufacturing issues that are also leading and contributing to some of these uncertain forecasts, this uneven flow in the network. So really interesting responses there. It's now up to about 40% an uncertain forecast. Okay, thank you very much. I think that tells us something already about things we're going to be discussing over the next couple of days. Next question. So again, our theme of our conference is disrupting the status quo in vehicle logistics. In what ways has your company or have your partners most disrupted the status quo in your vehicle logistics network? Is it by using new ports, for example? Is it through digitalization? Is it through alternative transport means? Is it through diversifying your partners? And here we have another set. So again, we have our answers flowing in. Or is it, also between rebalanced transport modes? So again, another two-horse race at the moment, it looks like, between digitalization and alternative transport modes, which have come in to help disrupt your vehicle logistics network. But also not an insignificant amount of you looking at things like diversified partners, new port operations as well. So lots of change. Alternative transport is now moving pretty well ahead, actually. So 45% have turned in some ways to alternative transport modes compared to perhaps what you've traditionally been doing in the industry. So very interesting. Thank you. Digitalization at 34%. So a big chunk. Okay, last question for this morning, and then we're gonna put some of these questions to two experts as well. So what will most support more reliable, competitive vehicle logistics over the next three years or more? So looking out to the long term, what's going to help you most? Transparent sharing of plans, long-term contracts, fleet and infrastructure renewal, digital transformation, or long-term or network re-engineering. Again, unfortunately, no all of the above answer available. Okay, so it's going to be maybe a three-horse race this time. Long-term contracts is just about coming up ahead, but very, very, very close behind with transparent sharing of plans. We might see a link between those things as well. 40% at long-term contracts. So long-term contracts looks like it's going to stay as the top answer, pretty close behind transparent sharing of plans, and digital transformation coming up third. A smaller amount looking to things like fleet and infrastructure renewal. So although we're sure that's important, you actually think stability is going to be driven much, much more in how you partner. And if you take those two things together, having a long-term contract, a long-term partnership together with an open sharing of information and data, that seems to be the secret sauce in the industry right now. Thank you very much for your responses. I think that's a really interesting, again, tone setter for our event. Those are questions, the types of questions we're certainly going to be talking about in our panel over the next, over our session, but again, across the coming days. What we're going to do now, we're going to go into our first panel. I'm going to invite two leaders from major OEMs here in the US and North America. They'll be joined afterwards as well by two major logistics providers before we then have a presentation from Volkswagen. So I'd like to first invite our first speaker here, who's the first time she's joining us at Finished Vehicle Logistics North America, and indeed came into the role leading vehicle logistics at Subaru of America around a year or so ago, has had key roles in sales regions and dealer operations at the company and also previously for Toyota and Lexus. She's currently responsible for logistics, scheduling, distribution, yard operations, as well as parts logistics at Subaru of America. Very pleased to welcome Lisa Klein. Hi, Lisa. Have a seat here.
Okay.
Thanks very much for joining us, Lisa.
Yes. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Please have a seat.
Okay.
Also very pleased you could join us. He has more than a decade experience in key roles in vehicle logistics, operations, network design, and quality at Ford, and since 2022 in the current role overseeing planning activities that include network design, distribution strategies for new model launches, freight payment, business digital solutions, always full of initiatives and ideas. Very pleased that Paul Rusin, Vehicle Logistics Planning Manager from Ford, can do it with us today. Paul, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks you. Join us. All right, fantastic. Great to have you both with us in the bright lights. So you all know you don't exist. You're basically a black hole. It's just the three of us here. So feel free to speak openly. I'll have some questions, but we'll also open it up for our audience as well. Lisa, I'd like to start with you. You know, as I just mentioned, you came into role a year ago. What would you highlight some of the most significant changes, be it organizationally, operational, that you've been overseeing since you came into the role at Subaru of America?
Absolutely. Thank you, Christopher. I think the biggest piece for me as far as consideration with leading the department is it all comes down to the people, right? Nothing gets done unless you have the right people in the right positions to carry forward the best efficiencies and the best productivity. So I literally have spent the last year, and it will still be an ongoing effort, at evaluating what functions are working well, what needs to be evaluated, are people really in the true spaces that they need to be in order to help carry the business forward. And so as an example, everybody is heading into our future EV journey. And so for Subaru, when we announced last summer what our strategic direction would be as far as EVs are concerned, was where do we need to outfit our department in order to make sure that we are touching on the highest priority functions for Subaru of America. And so in the last year, we've been able to evaluate each of our functions. And so just take a couple steps backwards. My team basically touches sales operations. So right, nothing happens unless an invoice and a Monroney label exists. So everything from the model op, spec code generation and all that, just the infrastructure needs to happen. That's one bucket. The second bucket is, of course, logistics that touches both vehicles and parts. And then we also have vehicle production planning. So everything from what we request of our parent company for vehicle production, how we forecast and align that with our sales department for our sales goals each year. But another component of it is actually corporate vehicles. So everybody driving our vehicles within the company is part of our function. And so what I found was that pieces of that operation were misaligned with what we need to take a look at to get towards the future. So I actually realigned the corporate vehicle function into another section of our department, brought on an EV planning and distribution manager. Obviously, we don't get anywhere with an EV unless we have one very strategic person to help guide us in a lot of that activity. And then we also added some analyst positions in order to realign the strategic analysis that needs to take place for our EV future. And so I have spent quite a bit of time there. We're not done. Obviously, putting people in the right places is the right start in order to make sure that everything is functioning going forward.
Well, that's exciting. And for those who don't know, I mean, Subaru may currently, I believe, have one EV in the market, but more coming, a model that will be produced in the US as well, together with Toyota, as I understand it as well. So obviously, the right time to be getting the teams aligned and planning for that.
Absolutely.
And Paul, you joined us on stage in Dearborn. On the home, and let's say as the home field player the last time. And of course, that was in September. Not too different, perhaps. There was plenty of capacity shortages going on, notably rail, Mexico. But things changed pretty rapidly. How would you kind of summarize the situation you're facing today at Ford, and what are some of the key measures and changes that you've been taking to address those issues?
Yeah, so it's funny, when we were talking in Dearborn, we were probably at the height of our railcar shortage issues, and we had a lot of risks with labor disruptions. But it's kind of gotten better, I would say, since then, especially in Mexico and Canada. We've had some near-term headwinds with the bridge in Baltimore.
Yep.
We've had some challenges in Portland trying to get some rail cars out. I think we've tried to mitigate those as much as possible, specifically to Mexico, because that was the big concern last time we were speaking. I know some OEMs, Ford specifically, what we did to try and mitigate some of those was to lean into key rail partnerships and how we could design our network better so that we could generate more empties to give ourselves lift out of Mexico. When we were speaking in September last year, we were at like 60-70% railcar order fulfillment, and it was a real strain. Yeah. And so I know some carriers look to either vertically integrate themselves and try to get off of rail, maybe containerize. But that presented new bottlenecks, right? In Veracruz, if people are familiar with that port, it's really strong in rail infrastructure, but when you try to convert that from rail to car haul, the new bottleneck was, how do you get these trucks into the port? They only had like 4 gates to bring trucks into. So I really commend the Port Authority in Veracruz. They increased their gates by like 500%. They went from 4 gates to 19. So when you shifted that, you could actually get your product in from Mexico City or any other local assembly plants. So that kind of helped us either leverage short sea, or especially with our exports going over to Europe. But now the focus is really in the P&W now. It's the new problem, and I'm sure you got questions that you want to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Lisa, you obviously also came into the role at a time when the network was feeling plenty of these sorts of disruptions. Perhaps Mexico is less of a factor for Subaru, but I can imagine the West Coast as being it. I mean, was that, as well as aligning organizationally, did you have to take some measures with your partners to mitigate some of these challenges as well?
As far as taking measures, it's probably not the best description. We've talked before about how important our partnerships are to our operation. And so, when they are understanding what our mission is, what the job is at hand, communication is very key. But at the same time, Port of Vancouver just experienced their record year. They hit that record in the fall for Subaru operations. And while that's a tremendous accomplishment by that port, just the amount of volume that port saw alone last year was just tremendous. But when we're up against a situation of railcar shortages and need to move product to a very critical part of our country through that port, it becomes a challenge. So when our theme here is about disrupting the status quo, my journey into the department was pretty much asking our team members, do we hit the reset button every single month the way that we have been since prior to 2019? Or do we truly take a different lens at how we approach the business? It's not a reset every single month. And so I've really urged our team to take a look at metrics that really hone in on where we can get better efficiencies. And so just as a pure example, when we're relying on a huge amount of our product coming into Port of Vancouver to get towards our central part of the United States, but railcar supply is a challenge, where can we also introduce a different port of entry for a certain region of our operations? And that wasn't requiring, bringing on new partnerships. That was actually going to the table with our existing partnerships and saying, hey, where can we reenact a partnership that isn't as strong or relevant today, but that we can lean on in order to take us to the future? Or figure out, okay, long term, if the problem is now and it's going to persist, when can we look forward to some alleviation of that challenge?
And Paul, you alluded, the Pacific West Coast has sure also been a crunch point for Ford. What are some of the things you've had to do too?
Yeah, it's not just for Ford, it's many other
obviously.
OEMs. But, you look at the Pacific Northwest and, what we need to originate out of that port going inland with all this land bridging, we're at like a 300% deficit. So we need to originate 3 times as many that we're terminating. And I think, when these networks got designed, we were at a time where the ocean capacity just wasn't there. The tonnage wasn't there, as well as, the rates going through the Panama Canal was kind of cost prohibitive. So a lot of OEMs just leveraged a U.S. West Coast option. And I think a lot of OEMs are probably revisiting that. And tonnage is opening up. Pricing is getting a little bit more attractive to maybe consider a dual coast or a multi-port solution. And maybe displacing some volume from Portland and into California, or even going through the Panama Canal to revisit the U.S. East Coast. But those are all long-term solutions, right? In the immediate short term, I think automakers are having to rely more on long-distance truck. And you talk about disrupting the status quo I think OEMs are looking at a series of hub and spokes. So, hey, how do I truck from Portland into Vegas or into Denver or Chicago and then truck from there, right? Because it's really hard to build those loads going to 5 or 6 different dealers originating from Portland. But if you can centralize them all into one location and then kind of disperse it from there, at least it's getting the vehicles to market, right? Because the last thing the dealers or the customers want to hear is that there's a railcar shortage in Portland, and that's why they don't have their new model product.
Yeah.
So that's one example. Another thing is how do we look to maybe co-load with other OEMs? How do you maybe truck into Canada and do northbound loading if there's empties in Vancouver? Hey, do we do some trucking from Portland or Aurelia or Tacoma and get them up to where the railcars are at and kind of chasing them?
Yeah, so lots of measures then. One thing we've also talked about at Ford, you also look to increase flexibility, for example, extending dealer times, right, for deliveries. I think we spoke about it a bit last year in September. Pickups, for example. This is something that's coming more and more into your network.
Yeah, dealer pickups is something that we're on a journey. We're trying to scale. Some OEMs do it better than others. But we view it as a way to, we don't want to put the onus on the dealerships, but we want to make it available to them to leverage if they see fit, right? And I think previously there wasn't a really good, robust solution for them to do it. It was all done phone calls, emails, PDFs. And so one thing that we really tried to lean in on, and we used our partner to do it, Freight Verify, was we leveraged a tool, a portal within their application that streamlines that whole process, right? So a dealer can go into that portal and say, hey, I want to pick up that vehicle. It sends it to the yard manager. They see if that vehicle is built into a load, and if not, or if it's not going to get into a load quickly, then they can come with instructions to the facility, the plant, the port, the ramp, whatever, and pick it up themselves. And so why we love that is it's just one less unit that you got to put on a car hauler, right? And so it opens up natural capacity into the network.
And it's a direct customer service, if you like, too, right? They're kind of helping them to take that matter into their own hands.
Sure.
Lisa, you alluded, not hitting the reset button, and I know scheduling and allocation is an important part of your function as well. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the things that you've done to change that?
Well, two separate functions, right? Very distinctly different functions. So I'll talk about the scheduling piece. With vehicle demand and sales being driven by leadership in different markets than what we've been accustomed to, right? Economies have certainly hindered sales in certain parts of the country, and so we've got to get product to the right place at the right time. The scheduling piece of it is making sure that the health of each port is sustained. I've talked about people already in this discussion, making sure that our port labor is protected, making sure that our port leadership knows what's coming and coming down the pipeline. So scheduling has been asked to basically take a look at instead, if a majority of our transit up front is rail because of the longer transit times, is it going to the right parts of the country? And we've had to pivot in certain ways the past 12 months pretty much to make sure that the product was moving to the right place. As far as allocation is concerned, that's probably yet to be determined, as we head into the world of regulation and making sure that we are sending a good line share of our EVs to the right parts of the country. That is absolutely a work in progress right now. We literally sit in think tank meetings pretty frequently to talk about what is feasible on the IT side, how much can we get done in a setup time frame to make sure that we go to launch at the right time, because that is a very time-sensitive action that we need to take. And so while two very distinct functions, I think getting people to, hey, still focus on the fires of today, but I really need your experience and your insights to help us plan for all of these things that are coming to a head.
Absolutely. In a couple of minutes, I'm going to bring two key logistics providers into this discussion as well to broaden that. But before I do, maybe just looking at some of the market dynamics here. Now, it's no secret that the EV market isn't perhaps running at the same pace that might have been forecasted a year ago, and there's some changes in the way we're serving customers in terms of the model lineup. Paul, what impact, or is that impacting your vehicle logistics, how you're planning, how you're looking at your network?
Yeah, so I would just say with EV demand, I think a lot of automakers, they design their networks for a higher adoption rate, which is great. I mean, I know at Ford we planned for a number that was significantly more than what we're doing, and how we did that was to diversify our supply chain, right? So a lot of our current EV production is in Mexico, right? And given the shortages that were going on, we wanted to diversify ourselves and really have maybe a third of it going up the West Coast, a third of it going up the East Coast, and then a third of it going up via rail. So I'll say the plumbing is in place for when that demand naturally builds itself up. And you just got to be ready to be able to have a network that is, I guess, resilient enough to be able to ebb and flow with that demand. Yeah, and so in the meantime, there's more hybrids, you're ready to go and do that, but when the demand does pick back up, you can plug it back in. And Lisa, you alert, as mentioned, I mean, it's not at a high volume right now, but you're taking key steps to plan, and that seems a fortuitous position to be in. What would you highlight, especially with a logistics audience here? I mean, what are some of the areas to prepare, be it in terms of infrastructure or in the network? What are some ways you want to work with the industry, if you like, to prepare for that growth?
Yeah, preparation is critical, right? One thing that my logistics team, and they're represented here in the audience today, has been very conscientious of is making sure that each of our business partners knows exactly where Subaru of America is headed strategically. And so being open in communication about what we know now, we don't have all the facts together just yet. But just as a simple example, 2 weeks ago, we held our first inaugural logistics partner summit. And, you know, my logistics team here had approached the topic saying, hey, you know, it'd be a really great opportunity to really bring into the fold our logistics partners, communicate what we know, and be able to share how what we know impacts what their operation may look like, you know, whether it's 6 months from now, whether it's 12 months from now. We received so much positive feedback from that summit because it was hand in hand as partners, what are we conveying to them to make sure that we're not going to disrupt their operation in a hefty way. But the feedback that came back was, hey, we know exactly where Subaru stands right now. They want us to do business with us and carry us hand in hand towards that EV future, and that gives us confidence that we have the right partners aligned.
Fantastic. Well, let's bring some other partners into the discussion here. There's a range of topics that obviously we want to hear from them as well. So the first speaker I'd like to bring on, until recently was the founder and owner of a company that was highly specialized in moving cars and containers. That has now been acquired by DP World, and he's helping to build up a vehicle logistics network and solutions across DP World's network. I'm very glad to welcome Christoph Seiss. Christoph, great to have you here. Why don't you join us?
Hi, Paul.
Hey, how's it going?
And also the speaker coming from the broker side, extensive experience across logistics. Today is leading the sales function at RPM, working across logistics providers and OEMs. Very pleased that Sean Baltazar from RPM can join us as well. Sean, welcome. Thanks very much. Have a seat. Okay, so now we'll go into a bit more questions across some functions here. Christoph, I want to turn to you. Now, the poll that we did up front, one of their options was alternative transport, as you know, was that one of the biggest ways you disrupted it? And I wouldn't say that was necessarily entirely cars and containers, but certainly that would have been amongst the areas. And we have great examples, and we'll hear more about where that has become a bit more a part of the network than perhaps previously would have been expected. Where do you see other opportunities, or do you see bigger opportunities in North America, particularly in terms of region or mode?
As some of you know, I come from a very small company that was highly specialized in cars and containers, so I'm a little bit biased towards the product. Fully aware that it's never going to replace RoRo or multi-level railroad or take a significant share of that, right? Those dynamics will always be the same, but it's currently very hot. A lot of people are doing it, so naturally, when I joined 6 months ago to head the finished vehicle vertical, you know, immediate focus was on, hey, where are sort of the immediate opportunities? Best example I can give is goes straight to the North American multi-level railcar capacity shortage, which is especially hit Mexico quite hard last summer and lasted well into this year, I would say, and some expect more of that this year. So we moved a large batch of vehicles out of Mexico into the US using 53-foot containers. So moving those by rail, able to do 5 cars per container, so quite high utilization. Pricing obviously is not going to compare with the multi-level or short sea RoRo, but definitely a very good release valve, let's say. So that was an obvious one. Another good example I can give is, you know, DP World, obviously a very large global ports and terminals operator. About 10% of the global trade, and vehicles for that matter, flow through DP World ports. Good location is Caucedo, in the Dominican Republic, and one thing I've learned over the last 10, 15 years dealing with OEMs is that the Caribbean is a notorious pain point, you know? It's just very difficult to get cars efficiently and cost-effectively into the island. So DP World has a large presence in Caucedo, Dominican Republic, and there we're working, for example, on a hub-and-spoke model where the idea is to bring cars into Caucedo as a central hub and then use spoke mechanisms, be it short feeder vessels or smaller container ships and so on, to deliver into the region. So plenty of opportunity on that side. Just in general, the overall pain points in the U.S. are definitely driven by railcar capacity shortages and compound space and backlog and all this stuff. There's only so much a DP World can do on the proper continent side, but there's definitely niche opportunities where we can alleviate that.
Yeah. Sean, obviously, in part of brokerage, I mean, one of the things you're doing is constantly leveraging opportunities across asset, non-asset-based logistics. How do you see this trend developing? Where are the growth opportunities, whether it's by region or trade lane for RPM?
Yeah, thank you, Christopher. I think we continue to see, and Paul echoed some of these sentiments, that as rail car shortages persist, as distribution networks change, that longer haul trucking has become more in vogue. You have to get vehicles to further and further destination points. We also know a number of OEMs have pushed hard into the commercial space. We know Ford is a big player in the commercial space, which presents its own equipment challenges as it relates to upfitted and large units. So leveraging what I think of as non-traditional capacity for hauling vehicles has entered the fray more and more. I think we also continue to see an opportunity to bring in more and more players into the space that ultimately have not traditionally hauled vehicles or hauled new finished vehicles, and that's really the push we're continuing to march towards, which is standardizing what I think of as like the sub-hauler network, and doing that with quality and also transparency for OEMs in terms of the number of unique carriers we use on the distribution, how we refine that mix over time, over a contract, and really trying to, I would say, elevate the sort of long tail of capacity that exists in car haul that traditionally, kind of ebbs and flows into a customer's network, or may not even be available for an OEM to tap into historically because it's so fragmented.
Paul, when you look across your network right now on the land side, are you having to turn increasingly or still at a high level on the spot market, or are you able to satisfy that mainly through your contracted carriers? Is it a healthy balance right now, or how would you sort of characterize it?
We're definitely leveraging the spot market. We don't like to, but it's a necessity. It's an evil necessity. We try to minimize it as much as possible. A lot of it is our own doing, though, I'll have to say. So, if you come into a new model launch and you have to pent up inventory, right, and then you have these mass releases, there's only so much rail capacity out there, right? So we look to our partners such as RPM and a lot of the asset-based providers to help us assist with that. Because at the end of the day, one thing that we're doing as a company, I think maybe other OEMs are as well, we're giving an estimated time of arrival or an ETA to our customer, right? And so it's really important that we hit that. I think that's one thing that has changed over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, vehicles would just show up at dealerships and there was no questions asked, right? There wasn't an expectation. But there's this new shift in consumer demand where if you buy a $50 package on Amazon, you would expect that you would have that same level of visibility for an $80,000 truck. And so that's really the fourth pillar of our metrics. It's always just been cost, quality, and speed, but there's this fourth component of reliability. And we're on a journey to try and get to 90% or better on time or early. Last year we had our challenges. I think we were like 70% accurate at the time when it becomes shippable. Now we're trending towards 90%. We're trying to get even better than that. And in order to hit those ETAs, and if you have rail car shortages, it means hit the expedite button and take it off rail, right? Which is, it can be costly, right? But ultimately it's what the customer expects.
Yeah. Well, as you said, I mean, sometimes you need to expedite to hit that. And just a point on that is that on-time ratio on the day or a day range. I mean, how do you define that? That you, with the 90%, for example, is that delivered on time to the day that was said? Or
correct, yeah. So like when a vehicle is produced, we look at our route plan and says, okay, if I'm going from Dearborn to California, based off how many days I should be waiting on a rail car, how many days that is in transit on rail, how many days it gets to the ramp to the dealer, it should be, make up a number, 18 days, right? Yeah. And so it says if I'm trending and I'm going to miss that window, I got to either make, hey, I think there's some buffer at the end where I can make up for it, or if I'm not going to make up for it, I got to make that judgment call to get back on plan.
Yeah. And Lisa, now Subaru traditionally carries low inventory. That's been part of the model, and we've talked about looking strategically at allocation and scheduling. Is it still a similar picture? You still need to press that expedite button, balance between carrier and spot market?
Probably within the time that I've been in this seat, we haven't seen it as much of an urgency as we have, prior to this seat, I was out in the field, and every vehicle out there was pretty much a hot car, that we needed ASAP. I think with retailers that have basically built between a 1 and a 1/2 months day supply on their lots, that certainly has alleviated that. I do evaluate what our sold order bank looks like, and that has certainly decreased in significant volume. So it really hasn't been a push, I guess, on the system as much as it was maybe even 12 to 18 months ago.
Understood. Christoph, and to Sean, but starting you, Christoph. I mean, we're talking about the need for backup plans here and to, meet targets based on that. But are you also working a bit more proactively with customers, if you like, to set up Plan B a bit more in advance? So Plan B becomes a little bit more Plan A plus.
I think I speak for many here when I say that, yes, that it's possible and it's being done, right? Yeah. Moving proactively. But I firmly believe the transparency is not necessarily there from the industry in terms of providing long-term visibility or looking 3 months ahead. Currently, especially, right, with this extreme volatile moment, it is very difficult to get a longer-term outlook that allows us to plan proactively for certain solutions.
Yeah.
So what we're doing, for example, globally is with that large ports and terminals network, is to look at which terminals that are already handling RoRo ships, what other services can we offer around it. One big need globally around the world right now is the need for storage, right? Especially with Chinese OEMs pushing product into the markets very aggressively, and often they sit, for quite a while. So we're looking at, what can we provide in terms of RoRo processing at the port, yard management, compound management, space, providing space. I think that's a significant advantage if we can provide space that kind of alleviates some of those concerns as well. So but I would urge the industry, especially the OEMs, to provide as much transparency as possible. And I know that's not always possible, right? It's such a difficult time to navigate more than a few weeks ahead, but as much as it's possible with those providers that they trust, I think it's very valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And your point on the space with Chinese OEM, not an issue here in the US, of course, but in Mexico, extremely so. In Europe, we see plenty of examples of that as well. Sean, again, from your side, how are you working a bit more proactively with your partners and with OEMs to try to have a plan B in place for these eventualities?
Yeah, I think the industry suffers from what I'll call planned failure, in which procurement processes end up building a scenario on paper that works really well in a vacuum, and ultimately some of that runs up against the realities of what plays out in the day-to-day, and I think the data tells the story. What goes to spot buy in a network tells the story of where potentially you have a partner that could be very successful on certain parts of a distribution or certain parts of a network, and the parts where failure happens ultimately shine through in that spot buy data, but a change doesn't get made because everyone polled said long-term contracts are the way to do it, when in reality, the market is moving so fast and things are so dynamic that locking someone into a distribution that fits maybe 60% of what they can realistically support or 40% of what they can support at a 3-year term ultimately leads to sort of a perpetuating cycle of, hey, we're trying to fit square pegs into round holes, and how can we really add more flexibility and be more agile to the network is really where we should be driving towards. And so when we talk about disrupting, I think disruption's happening, and how we orient processes around procuring transportation has to move with that disruption, and I don't think we've seen enough of that. So we end up seeing the same sort of bid processes play out where it's take the good with the bad. Hey, if you want it all, you gotta try to fit your model into it, instead of having a more upstream intelligent conversation around how can we set one partner up for success to do what they do really well, and then start to take parts of that distribution and say, are there other providers that could potentially fill in these gaps? I know Paul has worked on this at Ford, and we've talked about it, about sort of looking at the faraway dealers that get low volume, and how do you mitigate that stuff that ultimately ends up in a spot buy, and really start to not necessarily always wave this, use the stick, if you will, with partners, but say there should be carrots buried in this distribution that's really good for your network, and how do we start to sort of pull this apart and redesign it more intelligently?
Well, I think it was telling that the poll, it was long-term contracts, but it was almost as many about transparent sharing of data and information. And I think any long-term agreement is going to really be, the basis of that is probably going to be some degree of transparency and openness. But on that point, Paul, I mean, what could be better, what can Ford or what can OEMs better do to be more transparent, to share? I mean, is it partly because it's so volatile, and internally at any OEM, we know it's a bit of a multi-headed beast to come up with the production numbers, and is it just that by the time it comes to your department, you're sharing it as much as you can? It's just a bit of a there, or can you give us some light into that?
Yeah, I don't think OEMs are like trying to hog the data or hide the data or anything like that. I think it's a matter of how do you democratize that data efficiently. One thing, a project that one of my team's working on right now is we're trying to build, we're calling it a supplier portal, right? And so I want to provide that transparency on the VIN level to all of our transportation partners, rail, car haul, our yard managers, and we're going to give them an inventory view that basically says, here's all of your inventory that are at destination ramps, that are on rail cars headed to the destination ramps, that are still at my plant, that are serialized and scheduled for production. So there are no surprises of getting a spike at a ramp of 130% or 150%. So that'll allow them to better plan their resources, right? So they have trucks waiting there and available to them once they get unloaded. The key is making sure everyone knows that. So day zeros don't happen in our business, right? Because they don't have that reliability from the railroads that, hey, when this vehicle arrives, it's great that it's arrived, but when is it going to be available to me, right? So it takes a village to get there to have that efficiency. I would encourage everybody, if you're not sharing that data point today of, hey, here's all my inventory that's on rail, and here's when it's forecasted to arrive at that ramp, that capability is out there. It's just how do you, like I said, democratize in an efficient way.
Lisa, agree, different? I mean, does the Subaru approach anything distinct in that way?
I think it just hits up on communication once more. I know our logistics team is in very frequent conversation with our ports and our logistics partners, and so unless they know where our mind is at and where we're headed, it really affords stumbling across solutions unless we're open with our communication.
Yeah, Sean, I mean, it feels like, and I hate to just this is the first bingo buzzword we'll play, but it feels like there should be an AI solution that can help predict that, right? They should be able to say, okay, based on these conditions and what we see, this ramp is probably overloaded, or let's prepare. I mean, is it there and we're just not using it, or is that the next sort of step?
AI feels like the new blockchain. It's made its way into every marketing pitch everywhere. I think there are certainly probably some real-world applications for AI in our business, but I don't know if we've seen enough of what that technology can do to really understand what its impact can be. I view our industry as an optimization challenge every single day, and when you're talking about finite amounts of capacity, how do you intelligently match what's available to be shipped with what's truly available to ship it? And again, I think when speed has come into the equation more than it ever has been in terms of getting vehicles to customers, how you optimize that math equation with the equipment available is going to be predicated on that speed. So how do you use digitalization and technology to really play matchmaker every single day to fill sort of the available spaces that are sort of existing in the market at any one time. We didn't have to do that maybe 10 years ago when you're talking about, hey, things can kind of sit on ground, and as long as it picks up in kind of a week and a half to 2 weeks, and that's sort of slowly optimized as things come out of a plant or arrive at a railhead. That's a different scenario than constantly sort of, we call it reshuffling the deck, that you have to do as new inventory comes in, excuse me, and inventory is moving out and things go on hold. And that game of interchangeability is incredibly important and much more dynamic than it's ever been. So how do you have sort of technology do that every single day on a sort of continuous basis? And that's what we work on every day, as we have an infinite number of trucks available to us and infinite numbers of spaces available and inventory that's constantly changing, and how do we sort of optimize that on a continuous basis?
And Christoph, I mean, maybe not specifically in the North American vehicle logistics space, but DP World certainly at a global scale with 70, 80 ports. I mean, it must be a massive data set.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you're doing to leverage that, build models that perhaps can help us predict better?
I was going to make the blockchain joke. You know, we used to, I mean, it used to be an agenda item for these conferences, right? And now we don't even mention anymore. But I'm a big believer in technology. Same with AI. I think, yes, it's early. I think the industry is still in the process of discovering what's possible and how to put the pieces together. But I think it's just a matter of time, and the curve will go up quite steeply, where suddenly, you know, end-to-end visibility will become, you know, much better quality. Let's put it that way. For DP World, very exciting. They're putting a lot of investment into IT, have a huge IT workforce, sort of back office, working on, you know, TMS tools and trackability tools and all kinds of data analysis. So should be a very exciting time for years to come, especially for me, coming from a small company. We couldn't do that. Now we can do big stuff, you know, so for sure.
Absolutely. We have a few minutes left. If there are some questions from the audience, and forgive me, and perhaps anyone who even wants to defend blockchain, by the way, because it's not actually gone away. But fancy that right in the front here. And yeah, for your troubles, you have been given a microphone box.
I like this device actually. So I'm Ronald Kluivert from Venturas. We are a software provider in the automotive industry. I find it a very good conversation, by the way, but I was triggered by raising my hand on the blockchain joke in that respect. So blockchain, there's a difference between, when people hear blockchain, you hear, people think about cryptocurrency, people think about gaming. That's public blockchain. There's also private blockchain, which actually has become very successfully in many industries already, not only automotive, in the medical world, in the pharma world. So this is not a commercial conversation, but I just wanted to raise my hand because there are successes also in automotive industry. We actually have implemented private blockchain. That's only a technology, by the way, because the technology provides, I think it was you, Paul, who mentioned the transparency, the transparency in the industry. That's the nature of a decentralized network. So the question is more, if you want to elaborate a bit more, I think it is a misunderstanding, but especially I think to Christoph, and also the RPM, because you said there is the blockchain joke. So what is the blockchain joke? Because
I meant it as a positive, by the way. I wasn't knocking it.
Just for clarification, but I think that's important.
No, yeah, absolutely. We have another question here. Thank you for clarifying. And you know, we can talk about the Gartner hype cycle, right? I mean, you know, AI might be at the peak at the moment. We'll go through a trough of disillusionment, and you can be sure it's going to come into more steady use. But Srini, you have a question.
Wow. Okay. Thanks for remembering my name. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Okay. This is Srini from Agilence. We are network design tools software provider, mostly working on inbound. Recently started working on finished vehicle side. And learning about it, and this question is for Paul. Okay, I think I like the supplier portal idea, like sharing your plans and inventories and things like that, which can help the whole chain to plan things properly. I have a question for you. You are also actively engaged in AIAG, as I see. One of the charters of AIAG is to share the the movements of rail cars so that it can be beneficial for OEMs to see how the flow of the empties are there and they can plan their moves. If there is what is the kind of progress on that direction from AIG to bringing in all this data together in one place?
So AIIG, yeah.
Sure, tracking empty rail cars and the flows. I mean, the OEMs would love that.
That's what I'm just asking. Is there any progress
it's not up to the
made on
OEMs, I'll leave it at that. But we have had some success. Ford has a private fleet of rail cars outside of the TTX pool. And if you have a private fleet of rail cars and you have a strong relationship with a Class 1 railroad, they can give you a letter of authorization to see your rail cars both loaded and unloaded. So we've taken advantage of that. And so we can see and monitor our rail cycle times because we can see those rail cars when they're headed back, when they're going to be available to load. So I talked about hitting the expedite button. If I see that those empties aren't going to be arriving at my plant in a reasonable amount of time and I need to get stuff going, maybe I can divert that to truck, maybe I can divert that to short C. But getting it to the broader market of TTX, you're not going to get a no out of the OEMs. They'd love to see it. It's a matter of whether the Class 1s will share that empty railcar data. You see you're loaded, right? But once they go offline, that's where you lose sight of it.
And you mentioned they're having a private fleet. I mean, maybe is looking at areas of vertical integration, be it own fleet, be it chartered capacity. Is that remaining a consideration or a part of the strategy at certain areas of your network?
I think different OEMs are handling it a little bit differently. I know Ford has looked at, hey, what does it mean to have a dedicated rail fleet? There's pros and cons. I think operationally there is more of a disadvantage than a positive, but from the trucking space, OEMs are tinkering on that. Some have vertically integrated in small niche markets where it's maybe the most problematic to solve for, especially when you're having maybe launch events and you need to shuttle product maybe off-site for additional testing and things like that. There are benefits there that we've seen and realized. But everyone's going to do it differently. Yeah. But let's just say it's growing to investigate those opportunities.
And I mean, Lisa, you're always emphasizing the partnerships. And perhaps the scale of Subaru wouldn't suggest buying an own fleet. But do you look at areas and say, okay, maybe we need a bit more dedicated capacity here. We can set up some special services to make sure that we're okay out of the West Coast or what it might be.
Yeah, it's certainly not to the degree of, a specialized fleet or a dedicated fleet, but, I think the mantra is, we can't stop evaluating any option available to us. You're right on the scale size, Subaru is not quite as large as other OEMs, but, we need to be nimble for our future, and so we're not closed-minded to topics like that.
I mean, just a small insight, I think in Europe last year, there was a massive trend during the capacity crunch for OEMs to charter dedicated fleets. And the assessment afterwards is that it made the crisis worse in some cases because you had a lot of dedicated capacity moving empty because at any cost, I have those trucks coming to my plant. And it might have helped that plant, but in the network sense, it caused other issues. So, I mean, you can argue that from many points, but that's something we've seen unwind this year. So, interesting that sort of perspectives. Maybe time for one more audience question, if there is one, before we'll move to our last point. And count on my team to be my eyes and ears a little bit because it's not so easy. But I don't think I see a hand. So I'm just going to put one last question to our panel before I thank them for their time, which is, is there a disruption? We talked about disrupting the status quo. Is there a disruption that we're not talking about that we should be, kind of as an industry, as we look ahead? And maybe I'll turn to you on that one first, Paul.
Thank you for that. One thing that we didn't talk about is dealer hours, and this is something that Ford is super proud about. I went to our National Dealer Council maybe third quarter last year and said, guys, you guys are gating our haul-away carriers by only accepting Monday through Friday, right? Normal hours, and you're cutting yourself off to 30% of the time that they could deliver. And we were successful. I don't want to say a corporate mandate, but we were successful in saying now that 99% of all of our dealers except 24/7, except for instances of city ordinances or maybe safety issues. But that was a real positive, and I'm hoping that the rest of the OEMs maybe follow that curve, right? Because it'll lift the haul away performance for the entire industry. So that's one thing that we're doing, that we did to disrupt ourselves. And then the other one is really trying to scale drive away.
Yeah.
And so I know that can be a sensitive topic with some haul away carriers, but for the OEMs and for our customers, it's a really good way to combat the driver shortage, because I mean, it's not going away. I don't know the exact data point, maybe Sean has it, but I want to say the average age of a driver is about 50, 55 years old. And people aren't, graduating high school or college and want to be a trucker. It's just the reality of the situation. So what are OEMs doing to get out ahead of that? And so one thing that we're trying to do is leverage partners like Acertus, Dropcar, carriers that are specialized in that mode of transportation. And we're looking to do, drive vehicles away from plants or ramps to dealers within, say, 30, 50 miles to open up capacity so that you can put those car haul carriers on the longer haul freight and try to build organic capacity. And we're having a lot of success with that.
Yeah.
I think we're averaging around 2 days from when it's available to ship to when it's delivered. And so that's been really, really positive for us.
Great examples to take away. Christoph?
Yeah, I think technology, and in technology, I would say autonomous driving, both vehicles and trucks. I think it's inevitable, and it's probably sooner than we think.
Yeah.
And that could help in a big way in terms of driver shortages, right? The other one is, because you hear it over and over again, you think in 2024, technology is that far yet with visibility, where's my car? Clearly not there yet, and I think there's not been a breakthrough yet in end-to-end visibility, and that will come for sure as well with predictive learning and whatever. I'm not an expert at it, but I understand the basics, and I'm a firm believer that will make a huge difference once that visibility is there.
Absolutely. We just saw one OEM in Europe release details of how they're using autonomous driving features in the plant to move towards loading. So it's a step in that direction, and it's going to come. Sean, a disruption we should be talking about.
Christoph took a good one, digitalization. I mean, when you think about how antiquated the technology is in this space across both customers and probably trucking companies and all the players involved, I think we have a massive opportunity to introduce a lot more transparency and use the data to really plan better further upstream, and how partners work with OEMs and bring that visibility to what's behaving in their network as it relates to their purview of supporting the network, I think is where you can make your customer better, and also drive a different conversation to really start to model out different scenarios that can lead to more success in the future. So I think again, digitalization and that transparency around what's going on in the network ultimately will lead to I think less disruption in the long term, but certainly disruption in the here and now.
Absolutely. Well, absolutely shameless plug, but if you do want to talk more about digitalization and automotive logistics and supply chain, Nashville next month, you're going to hear more about this one soon.
We rehearsed this.
Yeah. So we'll share more details out. We've got a conference dedicated to this. But Lisa, the last word for you. Is there any area or disruption we should be talking about that we haven't been so far today?
Well, I think we've got to be super sensitive to what the consumer sees, right? Ultimately, we're not moving cars, we're not selling cars unless the demand is there and they understand where this industry is headed. My colleagues here spoke about some very key topics that we all need to focus in on, particularly for Subaru. If I can just speak particularly about what we stand for as a brand, we've built our foundation on love, right? Going to market differently and in a unique way. How do we keep that brand identity as these regulations come into play? When we're regulated into processes that we haven't thought completely through just yet, we'll get there. But consumers will see a different side of the business that we are all learning together, and I think that's probably one thing that we absolutely have to work together on.
Yeah. It's a great point and message to send to our audience there. I'm going to thank them. No one go anywhere because we have another really great presentation coming up. But before I introduce that, thank you so much to our panel and expert for kicking us off in such a great way. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thanks very much, Lisa. Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, pleasure. See you guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Christoph. So you all may exit stage left. Is it stage left? Yeah. Fantastic. And as I mentioned, I would encourage you in the audience not to go anywhere because we're going to keep this theme of disrupting the status quo. And we've got a really great example of it coming up in our next session and from our next speaker. As you'll hear, the Volkswagen Group faced exactly the challenges that we've outlined, continues to face the challenges that we've outlined in terms of capacity, in terms of vehicle backlogs, and took some very specific action at a North America level. And that's what we're going to drill down into in our next presentation and give you some opportunity for question and answers. So I'm going to introduce the next speaker. He's responsible for vehicle logistics and service parts logistics across Volkswagen Group of America. And as you'll soon learn, has recently gained some new responsibilities within that picture. 30 years in the industry, including with Ford and CNH. Very pleased to welcome Anu Goel, Executive VP Group After Sales and Service, Volkswagen Group of America. Thank you, Anu. Great to have you with us. Here's a clicker. Stage is yours. We'll have some Q&A after.
All right. Good morning. How you doing? Okay. So the theme of the conference is disrupting the status quo. I think it's better said adapting to survival with the disruption, right? Because I don't know how much I get to control the status quo, right? We end up dealing with the circumstances that we face. So Christopher had asked me to just walk you through some of the things that that had happened to us over the past year. When we were here last year at this time, things were okay, at least in the Volkswagen Group, defined as VW, Audi, US, Canada, Mexico. Okay, so sitting here, right, everything was good. Go back, and within about 6 weeks, the whole world, for us, turned upside down for a lot of the issues that we all know. I'm going to just walk you through what we did, what our learnings were, and some of the things that we're focusing on going into 2024 and 2025. With me so far? All right. I don't know about your company, but with ours, public affairs and legal gets to scrub the slides before I show them to you. So the words up here say the situation. My original draft said WTF. And you'll see why. Okay, so this is finished vehicles in the North American region on the top left. Last year, the blue was actuals as we went into June. And then July, August, right, et cetera, through December was what we thought was going to happen. So you can see there was a 73% increase in the first 6 months of the year. Trust me, that was not planned, right? Production was up. We doubled production. US market, Canada, Mexico, sales were up. So we adjusted our production plan, right? I still argue one of the toughest jobs in any of our companies today is production, because they do not know what parts are going to arrive basically on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis for the production schedule. So, right, so the surveys earlier that said uncertainty, that was a big part of it. So we doubled production in June as planned. The capacity to get cars from Mexico to the US and Canada that was planned did not materialize, right? So you see this stuff going up, right? The bottom is our external wholesales, defined as movement of cars to dealers, because we have internal wholesales as well. Mexico moves a car to the US, they ring the cash register, it's good for them, but it doesn't do anything. For the region, it's just moving working capital from one country to the other. So wholesales were flat, finished vehicles was up, and to dimension this for you, we were over $1.6 billion in finished vehicles on the ground in Mexico alone. $1.6 billion, right? That was the issue. So as you see, right, industry sales up, production up, wholesales flat, dealer inventory down, which was not good. Working capital was up, and VW market share down. We were losing market share in the US and Canada because we couldn't get cars across the border. Anybody want to sit in this chair and go explain that to the board? Right? The fact that we're here today tells you we fixed it. Right? We'll see how long that lasts, because we're only as good as what happened yesterday. So that was the situation. There were multiple causals for the backlog. We all know these. I'll go through this real quick. Rail capacity gap. Yes? Anybody in this room have a solution for it? All right, because if you do, I'll meet you out at the bar. We can talk about it, we can do things, and we did a few, but that's reality. We had port congestion in Veracruz. Right? Vessel schedules continue to get disrupted. 5 to 8 days on average late. So getting vessels in, unloading them from Europe, reloading them, getting them out. Who knows what's going to happen there? We had a truck driver shortage in Mexico and equipment. So moving cars from the plant to the ports was not smooth. And then, right, the weather happens, right? And it just, life happens, and that exacerbates the 5 to 8 days. Go show this slide to a board. What happens? I knew I can read the friggin' slide. What the hell are you doing about it? Well, I'm going to go to the temple and I'm going to talk to God about the weather, right, and a few other things. None of that stuff works, right? But those are the causals, right? So immediate action was required. We need to get cars moving, support sales, and reducing working capital. How many people in this room have their company started focusing on working capital? For us, that was fairly new. I had it in my life at the Blue Oval. We obviously had it in my life at CNH and Fiat Chrysler with Mr. Marchione. And our CEO now used to be a CFO at CNH. So working capital came into play, right? It's money, it's cash flow, all that stuff. So you add another metric besides, as Paul was saying earlier, cost, quality, dwell, right? Now you got to focus on working capital. So that's what we were charged with fixing. So this is actions taken, and they fall into 3-4 buckets, and I'll walk them through real fast. First of all, this is our North American region network. The reason I show this to you is standing here last year, or in June, me and my team were responsible for the US finished vehicle logistics, amongst other things. Right? We had Canada had their own organization structure, and Mexico, with Peter Koltai or at the time Wilfred Steyer, but now Peter Koltai and his team, had their own structure. But when you look at the rail and vessel movements in the region, it's all interconnected. So why do we have 3 different organization structures, right? One in each country, planning finished vehicle logistics movement? We need it to work as one team. Right? Now you can run into, can you have a person in Mexico reporting to someone in the US or vice versa? In our systems you can't, but you got to work together as a virtual team. So that's what we did immediately. We started having, and once again, as part of the scrubbing, I'm not allowed to use the term war room, so I won't. So we put together a task force. And we met every day to coordinate who was doing what to move vehicles. Right? That was the first step. We did a virtual organization to think NAR, think as one team. And that doesn't happen overnight because every country has their own objectives and every country has their own KPIs. And the definition of those KPIs is not always the same. Right? So for example, Mexico wholesales, as I said earlier, they get credit when they ship it. Right? If they ship it ahead earlier, if there's something wrong with it and it sits in a US port, that's not doing anybody any good. But Mexico got the credit. So we had to start doing things to make good regional decisions. Right? So that was the task force that we put in place. Transparency, single source of data. I would ask how many cars are on the ground in Mexico. I'd get a number, 5,000. Well, I heard we had 16. I heard we had 58,000. Well, we weren't counting the outside storage lots, and we weren't counting the cars in port in Veracruz, and oh, by the way, we didn't include the in-transit cars. Once again, back to the theme, WTF. How many cars are post-Checkpoint 8 in Mexico? Right? That was the $1.6 billion. So we worked on transparency and single source of truth. I'll talk about benchmarking in a minute. Short-term rail capacity. Mexico, since day one, had purchase orders with the 2 rail carriers in Mexico. Purchase orders. Set a rate, would call off against that rate. It worked for 60 plus years from the time the plant had opened originally. Did not work in June of last year. Did not work. There was no commitment from us to the carriers or the carriers to us on capacity. It was a shake hands relationship that fell apart with both of them. Okay? So if you're a rail carrier, would you want to do business with me off a purchase order? You got no commitment from me, you can't invest in new equipment, but trust me, I'll pay you. Yeah, okay, great. So we worked, and this wasn't a short-term action, but we worked to sign a long-term contract with one of the two rail carriers out of Mexico. And then our purchasing department worked to get extra trucking capacity in Mexico as well. On the far right-hand side, we opened a third seaport in Mexico in Tuxpan, just north of Veracruz. And we run between Tuxpan and a new port. We were running to Houston, but we just opened a new port in Freeport, closed down Houston. We'll show you that in a second. But that allowed us to have a dedicated vessel running between Tuxpan and Houston, now Freeport, to alleviate some of the congestion that we were dealing with in Veracruz. We increased yard capacity in Veracruz. We added a couple additional vessels. We got visibility of where those vessels were on the arrivals. Like I said, they were 5 to 8 days late, but we had to get better at that. And then one of the things we learned here last year, we started using container transport. The cost for containers, a car in a container, is 3 to 5 times what it is a normal method. Right? And we got better at it, but we shipped just short of what, 20,000 cars in containers over a 6 to 8 week period of time last year, just to create some space on the ground in Mexico. Right? And this is what we did. Worked with a couple companies. We sent them by rail through the middle part of the country to Canada, and then we sent them by vessel to the east coast of the United States, Jacksonville, Davisville, etc. Okay? First time when we started, you'd pull 2 cars into a container on the ground, fine, you'd strap them down, they'd arrive, you'd have some mirror damage, bumper damage, right? Stuff that you would normally expect. We got to stock up parts to do that. Then you get more sophisticated and you start doing racks so you can load them in better. Then you start going to larger containers where you can get 4 to 5 cars per container. And that brought the cost down to roughly 2 to 3 times what it was normal method. Right? The good thing is I work for a company that supported the things we needed to do. So was it necessary? I got that highlighted in yellow. Yeah, it was. Was it expensive? Damn right. Right? Did we learn? Yeah. One of my big learnings recently, as we export cars, it is cheaper to send a car to Australia in a container than it is on a ro-ro vessel. Right? Once again, team walked me through that. I said, WTF? They showed me the data. They're right. There's a lot of different reasons for it. We can talk about that over a drink. But there are instances where this makes sense. So don't just rule things out because of hearsay. I talked about benchmarking earlier. We brought in a consultant, not my favorite thing to do, but we needed some outside help to get some benchmarking data because we wanted to improve checkpoint 8 to dealer delivery. Right, checkpoint 8, for those of you that know, from the time a car is cleared from the end of the assembly line, right, all the way through dealer delivery. And we came up with metrics, and they shared with us metrics that we weren't using, which is the far left. And then we worked on a timeline on when to implement them. And the whole idea here was to get cars moving faster through the system. From Mexico, high level, roughly 30 days from the end of the assembly line in Puebla to delivery to the dealer. Rough, right, and ready. Okay? Every day you can take out of that frees up roughly 10 to 14 million in working capital. Right? So there's opportunities in what we do. How do we accessorize cars in the ports? What modes of transportation are we using? How long does it take our sales teams to assign a vehicle to a dealer? Right? What's their process for allocations? All that stuff got looked at. We put together a plan. This, I will argue, was one of the key things we did. I told you earlier, we managed this as countries, right? Individual countries. We put a task force in place, virtual task force, but we have now announced a formal organization structure for US, Canada, Mexico that reports up through me. We got the on-ground team in US, Canada, Mexico, so Rich Regan in the US, Peter Koltai in Mexico, Jeremy Green in Canada. But a lot of you in this room, I believe, know Scott Maybury. We've put in a coordination function. So the 3 on-ground leaders handle the day-to-day operations of finished vehicle logistics. We put in a control tower that manages capacity, that looks at capacity 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years out, right, aligning with a production plan. And they look at movements of vehicles within the region. And we work to do the best decision for the region. So for example, and I'll talk about this in a second, we launched the new port in Freeport. Soft launch March 1st. We went live April 1st. It's got about, pick a number, 14, 15,000 spaces. You get a vessel every 4+ days. When we opened that port, we got 9 vessels in 2 weeks. I'm now in outside storage in Freeport. Just open the friggin' place, right? Which has built up congestion in the port and processing, right? We're working to get everybody up to speed. So what do you do about that? In the past, Mexico would have said, that's your problem, that's Freeport, right? And they'd be right. They ship the vehicles. I got no place to put them, or I'm slowing down processing. We now say, hey, what do we do as a team? Do I slow vessels down into Freeport? Do I divert vessels that were going into Freeport to Jacksonville, Baltimore, and then move them across? We are now making decisions as a team to help solve those types of issues. In the past, it would have been pointing fingers. Okay, so that's one of the biggest things we did. Then we talk about this, but this is capacity planning. How many people here see the production schedules materialize as planned? Okay. If you have it, then let me know, because I'd like to send you my resume. It'd be a nicer place to work. This doesn't happen. It's a reality of what we do. You need to have some flexibility, and finance hates the term redundancy, built into our network, because redundancy means extra cost, right? But one of the big things we did was we built in some alternative flexibility into our network. So if something happens, I can flex to another mode of transportation. And it's cheaper than reacting on the fly, which is what we have done in the past. And we've demonstrated that to them, and we've gotten approval to put that in place, right? So that's how we've approached this. So what's the outcomes? I'm still employed, at least for the time being, which is, right, job number 1, at least for a couple more years. But what happened? We put the team together, and in the course of 30 to 45 days, we increased our shipping capacity out of Mexico by about 60%. The team accomplished things that I didn't even think were possible. I had a boss years ago that told me, you, by protecting your team, are limiting them, right? Cut them free, they'll figure it out. They figured it out, right? When was the last time you saw a network go up 60% in 30 days, right? In a constrained environment industry-wide. Did the same thing in Chattanooga. 100% plus increase in shipping capacity out of Chattanooga. And then what happened to the working capital in the backlog? We brought it down 92%. We brought $1 billion out of working capital. Okay? And we did this, we jumped on it in late June. I had to be in front of the board to present it. Fine. By October-ish, right, late October, we were pretty good. Right? We finished the year strong. Life was good. You can see what happened. Think fat, dumb, and happy. Right? Great. Go enjoy Christmas. Have a new year, right? Fresh start to 2024, right? And that's what we were doing. We said we did it. Yeah, not so friggin' fast. Right? Is we come in on January 2nd, right? And over the course of 4 to 5 weeks, we had 4 significant disruptions tossed at our network. One, we had a significant quality hold on one of our vehicles, which meant it had to stay at the source. I couldn't move it. Right? That was January 2nd. 4 or 5 days later, we had a significant stop ship that lasted 8 weeks on another vehicle. Between those two, we backed up 30,000 cars in Mexico. We're getting right back to where we were in June, right? And this is January 4th or 5th, right? Then we get a software hold, right? Those things happen. One of my learnings is our software fixes are typically 4 to 7 hour fixes, right? You want to go tie up cars in a port, right, to a laptop for 7 hours. See what that does to your throughput, right? Then at about 4:29, I think, in March, I got a call about the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse, right, which is about 3 hours after. 6 people lost their lives. They were fixing potholes on that bridge. Fell down. I've seen that video 1,000 times. I don't know how many of you have seen it. It's just, it's amazing. The loss of life and what happened are just sad. There's 21 people still on that vessel. Today's day 56. I think they finally docked yesterday. But they're not allowed to leave the ship, right? But it was a near miss for us. We were on the seaboard side of that bridge collapse. So we were able to get our vessels in and out, right? Unlike several other OEs that were more inland that have been impacted recently, right? So that was a near miss for us, but it did create congestion. It took away one of the 3 lanes in and out of the port. Go through the tunnel. Can you take hazardous materials through a tunnel? No. So can you put electric vehicles on carriers going through a tunnel? We had to work with our sales team. We adjusted dealer delivery hours, right, to get our trucks on the road at different hours as opposed to spending 3 to 4 hours in traffic. So it was just never ending. What you see in here on the bottom right, so the bottom left is Freeport when we launched. On the bottom right is Freeport after we dumped those 9 vessels. How's that look? Right? How'd you like to be the manager in Freeport? The port congestion in Veracruz associated with those 30,000 vehicles I told you that got backed up with the quality hold and stop ship. We have 12 vessels that run between the US and Europe, right, or North America and Europe. Any given time, 6 going one way, 6 going the other way, right? Just simple math. When those cars were finally released, I had 6 vessels alone circling Veracruz. Everything got out of kilter. Everything got out of kilter again. We got to respace those vessels, right, to get back onto track. But that's what we do, right? So disruption is a way of life. Take a deep breath. Work to solve the problem. That's what we get paid to do, right? That's our value add. It's a career choice I would never friggin' make again, right? I did not go to school for this, right? But it is what it is. So with that, I think we got some time for Q&A, but before that, we got several members of our team here. If I could just take a second, ask them to stand up, including some of our business partners that worked our way through this, because I'm just a pretty face. These are the people that did the work. So Heather, Ryan, et cetera, if you're around. Franzi, right? Paul, right? Thank you very much. Okay. I'll call it a success story, but it's more learnings than anything else. Right? Chris, thank you, sir.
Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you very much, Anu. Ladies and gentlemen, more than a pretty face, Anu Goel. Thank you, Anu, for sharing that. I think it encapsulates, on the one hand, many of the challenges that will be recognizable, but I mean, a really detailed insight into what you did, and the acknowledgement to the team as well, which is absolutely well deserved. We have a bit of time for questions, and so I'll encourage the audience as well. But I just wanted to start first on that control tower that Scott maybe is overseeing. Can you just I mean, on the one hand, I can imagine you're pulling in the information from the regions which you probably didn't have as kind of coordinated as previous. Is there a technology aspect to this as well in terms of additional systems or other visibility, tracking, for example, that you're building into this control tower?
Yeah, it's a good question. So you need 3 things to make this control tower work. You need the transparency of data, right? So you got to get people to give it to you. Real world stuff from the politics. There were some individuals that did not want to let up and make the data transparent because it may not put them in the best light. Right. Fine. So I had to ask for it. There were meetings basically every day in Mexico with the Mexican board, and they would not share the data with me until they shared it with the board, and then only scrubbed. Right? We got through that. That's politics. Right? Then second, you ask for systems access. Great. And then you get all the reasons why a U.S. person cannot have access to Mexican systems. Legal reason, everything that they throw at you. All right? You just need one reason to do it.
Yeah.
Right? So you got to fight through those types of things. And then you realize we all use different systems. We're friggin' Volkswagen Group. Right? We do things as a global system, but we have different systems in the region. So we are working. We're getting better at the transparency. I now have formal responsibility, so I can drive some of this stuff. And then the systems, we are going to need to get on the same system. And I have no illusions that we will be on the same system. I think we're going to have to do an overlay to pull data, to put it into one data cloud, data lake, whatever term IT is using these days.
Really interesting, and I think there will be a lot of long-term gains to come from this and from this integration of data. Another point I wanted to just pick up on before we open to the audience is the capacity and volume forecasting that you've implemented there. Now, again, you can talk a little bit about how it changed. What are you kind of doing now in that process that you previously weren't doing?
But we've always tried to be transparent with our business partners and carriers with what's happening with the data. And so you can give them a number and say, look, I'm going to make 2,000 cars a day out of Mexico. Fine. You need to get to the level, you need to get the detailed level by model. Okay, yeah, fine. You need to be transparent with them when things happen, and they will inevitably happen. You're going to have holds, issues, etc. There's certain things you cannot tell them, what the reason for it was. In some cases, we don't know the length of how long it's going to take to fix. If it's a software issue, you got to get the software developed, it's got to be tested, right? And then it'll be put through. So we've tried to share with them and get a little bit better planning, but that's not the easiest path right now.
No, and I think the examples, and actually it came up, it wasn't our top response, but software and quality holds was still like number 3, and 20 to 25% of people were pointing that out. So we see that complexity are elements that we're having to handle in the vehicle. Yet another element of complexity. On the one hand, perhaps it can be faster than some other fixes, but you still have to plug it into a laptop for 6-7 hours, and doing that at scale across a few thousand vehicles is I'm sure doesn't take 6 hours in and of itself. Are there any questions, points from the audience? I think it's quite a unique chance. So we have another question from Srini here up front. Yeah, let's see how good you are at catching. Well done.
Good to see you, Anu, after 6 years, I think.
Hello.
Hi. I think in one of the questions for you, I think this 30 minutes is worth of my trip to LA, I can tell you. Thank you.
Well.
Okay, question for you is, you said one of the slides, optimize with production plans, covered all transportation modes and highlight peaks to ensure capacity management. Is this optimization of the thing, is it done in a cyclical way, like a monthly or quarterly or yearly? Because normally what I heard or learning is that this is most of the times it is done like once in a couple of years kind of stuff earlier. How frequently are you doing this now?
We have, most if not all companies have their sales and operations planning meeting, right? Their standard meeting. Ours is monthly with a every 2-week check-in. So the way I'd answer the question for you is, you got to ask yourself, are you a production-driven company or are you a sales-driven company? Because that changes how you approach this. I will argue Volkswagen has historically been a production-driven company. That plant's going to run. Okay, it's going to make whatever it has parts to make. Now, this is a gross exaggeration. Okay, but we're going to keep that plant running. The question is, are we building the vehicles that will sell, that customers want? So the approach that's been taken, we're in the middle of a significant culture shift. Our sales team has the authority and the ability to say, don't build this. Because if we're building things that the consumer doesn't want, right? Because Sales gets the input. They say, here's what the customer wants, and purchasing goes to get the capacity, procures the parts, production then builds it. But if you're building something, if something's changed in consumer demand, then you're going to have to go put incentives on it. And all of a sudden the margins start to shrink, right? So why am I putting incentives on a car that the customer didn't want? So we're trying to change the culture to say, let's adjust the production schedule to what the demand is. And that does create some variability near term because it's going to cause a short-term reduction and then a readjustment as we switch to different trim levels or models. So it's done monthly with an every 2-week check-in.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more add-on? You said future AI capabilities in logistics. Are there any work being done, or like you're just thinking of?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Using AI capabilities in your optimization, logistics optimization. Is it like you're already doing the work, or you're planning to do the work?
Planning, right? As much as we'd like to think we're advanced, we are very manual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I see it. There's a hand right over there. Why don't we, are we brave enough to throw it? I don't know. That's a lot of pressure, Srini, but I'm going to put that on my colleague. So here we go. Long distance. No one's going to get hurt here. You've all signed the waivers. Whoa.
Oh, not bad.
We have a first down.
Now I have two. So my question is, wow, that got loud. Is there anything that you could ask for from your suppliers now that will help you increase your flexibility for the future?
That's a very good question.
As one of your suppliers.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'll tell you one of my learnings through it, and then we can see how that plays into your question. I won't say we were begging for help last June and July, but we were. Okay, the situation we were in. So for some of our business partners to help us out meant they would have to be taking equipment from someone else. It's the way it is. You learn in times like that who your true business partners are and who does business with you because they have to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So what I would ask for, and I learned this years ago when I was at the Blue Oval working for the Group Vice President of Purchasing, I want suppliers that are true business partners because then we get their best effort and we will work to deliver our commitments to them as well. I would rather deal with somebody like that than a transaction-based relationship. That, again, is a cultural shift. Right? And you have no reason to believe me other than that's how, as long as I'm here, that's how we want to work, and that's what we need. Okay? If this is transaction-based, then you're going to bail. I'm 2.7% market share VW, 1.1 Audi. Right? I'm not Ford, I'm not GM, I'm not Stellantis. Right? I'm not Volkswagen in Germany. Right? But we want and need business partners that will work with us.
If there's ever a status quo we want to disrupt, I think that is indeed probably the most important one. Last question, because I can see the coffee thirst. I can feel it emanating from the room. But Volkswagen is expanding in North America anew. Obviously, new models in Chattanooga. Scout is building a factory. PowerCo for the battery. There's more action coming in and out of Mexico. How do you see, or what are some of the key things that will impact on your logistics network over, let's say, the next 3-4 years?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. The beauty of this company is the power of the group. So I showed you the first thing we started doing was finished vehicle logistics, NAR. We're doing the same thing in after sales NAR. If you expand this out to what you just said, additional models in Chattanooga, Scout in South Carolina, PowerCo in Canada. We built a mega or a giga battery factory in Canada with no production facility in Canada. Those electric vehicle batteries got to get to Chattanooga and they got to get to Mexico. Okay, fine. We've got Navistar and the Traton Group, right? So the next evolution for us in logistics will be to look at inbound and outbound logistics as a group, right? And then now you start to bring scale and volume to our business partners,
Yeah.
right? As opposed to looking at it by country for a specific brand. That's the power of the group. Open it up, see what we can do to leverage the entire supply chain. Think about service parts. When I was at the Blue Oval, I had a boss that just asked me, hey, look, we should put vehicle logistics and parts logistics together because you're moving cars and parts to dealers on trucks. Yeah, you do realize they're car haulers and contain. Yeah, don't bother me with the details. They're friggin' trucks. What? Right? I want a triple bid overnight delivery in the United States. I got FedEx and UPS. Yeah, but our policy requires triple bid. Well, go talk to DHL and tell them no bid. Then I got a 30 bid. Yeah, what the? Back to WTF. Those are the types of things you got to overcome. You got to leverage the group synergies, right?
Yeah.
Some of this isn't just, but if you look at the business that way, opportunities will present themselves that you never would have thought of before.
Absolutely. And that is a powerful message for all of you, because of course, as you just outlined, we're switching from a brand function view to a region cross-brand. Just one example there, Volkswagen Group of America, others to come. Anu, thank you so much. This is great insight and really appreciate it. Thank you so much.